Hello guys, it is Kristi. I hope you are having a good Sunday. I am, that's going to be clipping. So I'm going to back off that sound just a little bit. That should be a bit better. There. I'm going to have to mess around with my filters, I think, because I did a training on OBS. There's my camera. I did a training on OBS and I switched around a lot of the settings to show how they worked. So this might be a little bit of a rough show initially, but it'll get better. It'll get better. Yes. So it's a Sunday. It's noon my time in Germany, and so that means it's time to have a show. Now, like I said, I'm running a little bit on the late side, just setup wise, because I slept in, and I started doing things last minute. Oh, okay, I see the slide. The stream. It's going now. I can see it on my tablet, and yes. Thanks for reminding me that I had my sound off, guys. I do appreciate that. You know, there's really like I have to check the settings, but I mute myself so there isn't any inadvertent background noise. But then when I'm so excited about going online, I forget to look at that. All right, I'm just going to play around with the sound a little bit, and let me tell you why. I spoke with a friend of mine who is in media. He does sound tech, actually, for one of the public television stations. Well, it's not just television, it's like audio and everything else. Anyway, he was saying that there are two schools of thought when it comes to sound in audio recording. One is that you basically try to make it as loud as possible without clipping, and that's one approach. Another approach is to sort of pick a decibel point that is within the green range, but also close to the yellow. So a pretty, like I don't know, what is it, like 30 something or 20 something decibels, and try to get everything around that so it doesn't clip. So just, I'm trying out some different philosophies of sound, or theories, I guess, of sound. And that was geeky and technical. So very much appropriate for my channel. I had a very interesting week. I don't know about you guys. I hope that your week was really good and full. It feels like so long since I last spoke to you because so much has happened. Not like, terrible or anything. Just I did a lot last week. I flew to Prague. I went early and managed to get there 2 hours early and to get this mug. Let me see. Ooh. It's a Mucha. I'm going to make sure I don't drop it. Hold it so delicately I drop coffee all over. That would be a bad way to start a show. But you guys might remember from last week the art I showed you. And I didn't have that much time. I went to the museum, the Mucha Museum in Prague, and basically hit the gift shop. That was all I really had time for. But I'd been there in the past, which is why I knew it was there and that I wanted to go back. So I managed to bring a little bit more Mucha back into my life, which was lovely. I think it's, I don't know, why do you connect with certain artists? I don't know. They speak to something, I guess, that connects with you, and it's just like a thing. So I got 2 more posters. I have 2 Mucha posters already in my living room, which you guys have never seen. You always see this part of my life. And I got a further 2, so hopefully now I can get maybe a 4 set across the wall, which would be really amazing. But on a more daily, practical level, I can now have a bit of beauty to start the world, especially the sort of idealized, European Western beauty with beautiful pastel colors. It's all very gentle. Maybe that's why. Especially in a world of Trump, you need something very delicate and gentle, just like to ease yourself into their shitstorm that is life these days. So, cheers. I also, as is my wont on a Sunday, found some philosophy of social science to get your nerd on. Now, this has to do with a different way to approach the social sciences. And if you remember from past episodes, I had mentioned positivism, which is the idea that we, instead of assuming that there's innate knowledge from God written on our hearts before we're even born, we just use our sensory information, and we use that experience as the basis, and we layer on more information on top of that, and we build knowledge literally through our experiences. And then we talked about the flaws of a naive positivism, where you don't reflect on the fact that your own brain structure and your own human body are a filter through which information comes in, and that our brains have already sort of built into them pattern recognition and other elements of how it organizes our sensory information before it hits our conscious minds. And that if we assume that is just not part of the process, as if our brains are directly and without any kind of interpretation or filter experiencing the natural world, we can sometimes mistake our own sensory processing for a given, something that's already given in the world and natural. So I want to talk a little bit here. I'm just going to do 2 paragraphs. Interpretive approaches and instrumental rationality. This is from chapter 5 of Philosophy of Social Science, The Philosophical Foundations of Social Thought by Ted Benton and Ian Crabb on Palgrave Macmillan Publishing House. I published with them, so I don't mind giving them a bit of a shout out in that way. Chapter 5, Interpretive Approaches, Instrumental Rationality. We now turn to a very different approach to social science and a very different notion of science. This tradition of thinking is closer to the rationalists than the empiricist traditions in philosophy, and the starting point is that whether or not positivism is an adequate philosophy of the natural sciences, whatever its advantages or drawbacks, the social sciences are qualitatively different from the natural sciences. The social sciences have objects of study that differ from those of the natural sciences, and they must develop their own specific methods to study those objects. We find the difference between the objects of the 2 types of sciences expressed in different ways. Perhaps the most obvious distinction is that the objects of the social sciences, human beings and human groups, possess a property that we know as self-consciousness. They are able to reflect on themselves and their situations and their relationships. Human life is essentially a life of meaning, of language, and reflective thought and communication. Sociologists often refer to this as reflexivity, and there are a number of very different approaches that are based on this human capacity for self-consciousness and reflection, but they all involve ways of interpreting the meanings that people give to their actions and are most concerned with the nature of rationality. They ask questions about what exactly it is that we do let me start that again. I was doing so well as well. They ask questions about what exactly it is that we do when we understand human action. How do we know? Nope. It says, how do we now whether our understanding, but I think they mean how do we know? How do we know whether our understanding is adequate? And indeed, what do we mean by adequate? What is the relationship between understanding and explanation? Can we understand action at all if it takes place in the contexts of another culture? These are clearly different concerns from those of the natural sciences, but they can be seen as related to the concerns of the philosophers and historians of the natural sciences, as discussed in chapters 3 and 4. And my goal here is to emphasize when we look at social scientific studies, yes, oftentimes they are informed by the natural sciences, but we can't bring a lot of the assumptions that we bring into the natural sciences about being detached and causality. It's much more difficult to understand human beings because of our conscious minds. Kristi Winters, I'm checking the chat now. I'm going to do, I want to do more of an interactive show, although right now I'm limited my technology to just the chat. But did I read PZ's articles, have I read P.Z. Meyer's article on the new atheism? John Milne asks. And I saw it and I skimmed it, but I have not had sufficient time to read it, although I know P.Z. Myers and I know he's awesome. And I know already I agree with his critiques, because they're not critiques he's just starting to make. It's critiques he's made in the past, and they're entirely valid. I think the gist of it is about the approaches that the scientists took, and then they sort of tried to use that scientific, skeptical, rational approach into their bigotries, to use it to justify. And we've seen the way that science has been abused in the past to justify misogyny and racism. Science is not free from those bigotries because science is a human process, and so as human beings we bring our bigotries and our bias to the process. And the problem with us as human beings being bigoted and biased, consciously or unconsciously, culturally informed, or, just sort of subconscious or unconscious biases that, we have sort of like preset in terms of familiarity. Now I forgot my point. But, oh, that's right. Even when the data tell us our biases are wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean we leave our biases behind. This is, it requires science requires human beings to be willing to let go of their previously held views when data presented make the rejection of those previous views the sensible and conclusion. And yet we're really bad. We're really emotionally attached a lot of times to the way we look at the world. And so science is definitely susceptible. There was a really good article too that I saw circulated on Twitter that was about the way that someone was saying that algorithms are racist, and people's reaction were, algorithms are math, they can't be racist. Like, well, what you put into an algorithm can be racist. The algorithm in and of itself is a mathematical formula, but the content and the assumptions and the sort of things that you set up to go into the algorithm can definitely be racist. So this is a very, I want to say, kindergarten level rejection of people who want to not have a serious conversation. When you say walls are racist, what does that mean? You're not saying concrete's racist, obviously. You're saying that how and where and why people put walls up are a reflection of their racism. What is going on here? I don't know. Oh, looks like I got to make sure something's connected here. Anyway, how did I get onto that topic? Am I lagging? Okay. It's my voice that's lagging. Let me check my audio properties. It also might just be that I have a lot of stuff going on. I'll try turning in. I think it might, yes, I'll have to check later on, maybe in the break. Maybe my stream is too nice for, I've got too high of a stream for what my bandwidth can handle. Sorry. I will see if I can reduce the amount of drag on my computer. So what I could do, for instance, is I can't turn off my mobile, but I can turn off my my tablet. So that would be a slightly less requirement on my system. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can do, but at the moment I don't think so. All right. Now, oh, there is something I did want to show you guys, laggy or not, for which I apologize. And now I can't see what you're saying in the chat because I've turned it off in an attempt to reduce the lag. I can actually show you some stuff on my screen, which could perhaps be part of the reason why it's a bit laggy, and then I can turn those off. Someone had asked, oh, no, don't start yet. Someone had asked for happier things. I like your show, Kristi, and I'm glad you're trying to laugh at really depressing politics. However, it would be sort of nice if maybe from time to time you could do something to cheer us up, and I will probably forget by the end of the show. So let's do it now. I found this on the Twitters yesterday, and this to me was just absolutely delightful. The problem is now that I have to, there we go. Let's start it from the beginning. Let's make it completely full screen. All right, guys, here's your moment of happiness for this weekend. And I don't really have any sound on it. It's just, look at the little kitty's eyes. Look how big its eyes gets. That's all I'm going to say. And then we're going to go 3, 2, 1, watch. It's the crouchy thing that gets me, especially. There you go. Cats. They're so funny. Right. So let's see if taking that off helps with the lag at all. There is another thing I wanted to do with show and tell for you guys, because I didn't prepare much in the way of content, and also Kevin and I did a pretty heavy show on Friday. I wanted to make this one a little bit lighthearted, and so we're going to do like the first bit lighthearted, easy morning, Sunday morning kind of things that interest me because it's my show. And then maybe get onto some analysis and politics in the second half. So little bit of coffee. You guys want to join me in drinking a bit of coffee or tea or whatever warm herbal drink or whatever else, depending on the time of the day. Who knows? Maybe it's a shot. Whatever you'd like. Prost. Another show and tell item, besides my coffee mug. Some people have talked about my quilt in the back. I'll turn the camera slightly. Yeah, you got the big thing of the mic here. You're just going to have to deal. This sort of 3D effect on my quilt there. I've told you before. It's called a window. I think it's called a windowsill quilt pattern or something like that. There are also what are called the stained glass ones, but this one I think is like called a windowsill. You can have this, the other thing too on this, if I had the length, you could turn it the other way and have a different effect based on the direction, whether it's horizontal or landscape. But when I went through my quilting phase, this one I like a lot. I do like this one a lot. It's not my favorite. It's not my most proud quilt though. I'm going to show you the quilt of which I am most proud. So get ready guys? Okay. This is from a pattern called the Drunkard's Path. And I'll show you the pattern first. Wah! Can you see? Yeah. So, this is pretty big. Hello. But you can get a sense of the pattern. It goes here like as it goes on. All right. So what I thought I would do is I'd pull up a little bit of information, and you can see obviously again the colors purple and white. I might have been a suffragette in a previous life because of all the purple in my life. But yeah, let's I wanted to get up some information on this. It's even popping up already. The Drunkard's Path quilt. All right, let's swap over to a different channel here. Yeah, I'm using the one. This is actually like very similar in the colors. This might have been no, it's not entirely similar. But anyway, find out a little bit about this. The history of it. Let's look into this. Okay, what does it say? Ooh, this is very, very light font. Maybe we can find another one. I wonder if there's a article on it in Wikipedia, but maybe not. Okay, so it basically comes from the temperance movement. The reason why it's called the Drunkard's Path is it sort of represents the path a drunk man would take home, and I think, I don't really understand appropriately how bad alcoholism was before the temperance movement. I think here we go, meaning, let's go there. History or meaning? I thought I saw meaning somewhere here. There we go. Yeah, we've got the history of the quilting here. So let's look that up and get a little bit smarter. And then after this, it's the same one we had before. All right, so I'm just going to struggle to read this. You guys are going to have to deal. The Drunkard's Path quilt patterns are a popular favorite among more experienced quilters. It was really hard, by the way. That was the reason why it's my favorite, is because it was a damn hard quilt to quilt. Who love a bit of a challenge. Characterized by its zigzag pattern made of pieces of curved fabric, this pattern resembles the path a staggering drunk might take on his way home. If you don't know the origins of this creative pattern, the history is both fascinating and surprising. Another name for the Drunkard's Path pattern is Solomon's Puzzle pattern. The origin of this pattern can be traced back to ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have discovered the design on Roman artifacts, and quilters in the early American colonies knew this pattern under a variety of names, but it came to prominence in the latter half of the 19th century. The oral tradition of this quilt was about the Underground Railroad. It may have been used as a way to help slaves find paths to freedom. I don't know about that. We have to do more checking. I have heard that as well, but I think the instances of that would probably be pretty limited. However, the use of quilts in the underground is an oral tradition, which is widely debated among quilting historians, quilt historians, like I said. Yeah, it sounds like white people who want to. It honestly sounds like white people who are like, hey, maybe this helps slaves. Other stories suggest the zigzag pattern first originated with the women's temperance movement in the early 20th century. I don't think it originated, but it probably was picked up by and popularized by it. The last movement is considered the third wave of temperance and began in the early 1890s, about the same time as Mucha, actually, as this month. The period saw the rise of the Anti-Saloon League, first organized in 1893. The prohibitionists were attracting a wave of diverse people across the political spectrum. Basically, it's I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's meant to look like a curve, like the path a drunk would take. And women use this in the temperance movement as a way to sort of symbolize why we have temperance. So that's it. Do you want to, I'll just show it to you maybe one more time, and then I will look at the chat. I'm going to have to have a way of reading the chat on screen though. Here we go. All right, so now that we've got that, you can have one more look at it now that you know the history. Yeah. Okay. There you go. So you can see the path. So that's it. So today you've learned about social science and you've learned about quilting, and we've only been going for about 25 minutes. There you go. Cool. Right. Now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and put up the browser. The question is how to do this. So, as you guys know, I don't like looking completely blind, and so what I might do instead is I might just close these out and go to the YouTube channel, because frankly, it's easier to read the window from you guys, and if it is the case that I'm lagging, I don't want to add more lag. So if you have questions, go ahead, or comments. I'm going to be scrolling through the chat now. You can write those, and I will be replying to them momentarily. Oh good, I've muted myself. Excellent. So let's see what you guys in the chat have to say. I'm just going to pop the chat out because it's easier that way. And then I can turn off the channel, and it's also less. I'm going to also shut down Washington Post because they had a video running that whole time. Maybe that's why I was laggy. So you can tell me if I'm getting any better. Right. Okay, let me see. I see questions. All right, there's the laggy thing. Thoughts on that political thriller novel that Roger Stone's lawyer wrote? Mike Balla Jr. asked. Hey Mike, how you doing? I did see the summary of it on Twitter. I didn't see the whole article, but am I right? Oh, you know what? Why don't I think I can actually do this. Boom! Look at that, guys. I think that's not so bad. Let me, though, I can do a thing here where I can make it a little bit bigger. So why don't I do that on the fly? Because I'm just a boss like that. Well, not entirely, but there we go. Now you can see me a bit better. Is that the one where the big twist... sorry, spoiler alert for Roger Stone's lawyer's shitty book. I guess. But is that the one where the big twist at the end, though, even though the president's a massive traitor, the real secret is that the president is gay? And that's the problem in the book. You guys can tell me if that's right or not. But it looks like it's shit, to be honest. I've got my early morning when I have some coffee nose fun. Yay! Kristi, question. A little bit laggy. Hopefully it'll get a bit better. Kristi, people are not rational, but most our decisions are taken on the basis of emotions. That's true. To work toward knowledge, we can try to eliminate bias, but methodologically, or we can develop MTF. I don't know what that means. However, but Bruce, you're absolutely right that I think for most we tend to how about I start over in English? I knew an academic who had this phrase. He said, we emote and then we rationalize. So we have an emotional experience and then we rationalize why we had that emotional experience. I think that tends to be how we do operate in the world, but we also have the capacity for reason, just like we have the capacity to have self-awareness of our own biases. It is through learning that we have biases, or learning that we are reacting emotionally and not rationally, or we're acting emotionally and then rationalizing it, that we identify that process in ourselves and we can start to observe it and not eliminate it, but kind of detach from it and be aware of it. I think that's the best we can do. We're probably, we all have unconscious biases, and our brains are, in terms of like just organizing the world into patterns. So the best things that we can do is have the knowledge of our own flaws so we can rise above them. But yes, we basically are always aspiring to remove, in the, the sciences, I should say, how should I say this? In a positivist approach to social science, so survey-based approach, we definitely want to remove those inherent biases. When it comes to qualitative research, we want to, again, be self-reflexively aware of those biases in terms of the production of our data, but we also are aware that other people have those biases too. So it's about capturing and understanding rather than eliminating, because in qualitative research, you're trying to understand meaning and motive and context that account for the behavior. Right. Bias that the stream is biased. Yes, the laggy stream is biased. Can one be accidentally racist? I think so. Sorry. I think racism can be learned, and then just like anything else, accidental in that it was handed down to you and you're reproducing it, you haven't reflected on it. Or as I said, I think there are presets as children look at faces that they're familiar with, and so we have some biological responsive linkages, so I don't think all racism is a self-conscious decision to be racist. I think a lot of it comes out of bigotries that are in your culture and are unreflected on, and you reproduce them without reflection. Is that saying being accidentally racist or you're not excused from it? No, but I'm just saying that not everybody is deliberately, who says racist things aren't deliberately going through that process. They're just reflecting garbage in their culture. I think that's what I mean. Emotionally more intelligent. Yeah, hopefully I answered your question there, Bruce. Hey, John, thanks for the £2. You're welcome. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. That's it. Just finished the chat with Destiny and loved it. Was that the one that I did with Destiny ages ago, Justin, or the one that was just on? Because the one Destiny I did ages ago, I also thought was really good. I think he was much more chatty, and I think in the other one it was early morning. But anyway, James says, I am fully in favor of cats appearing in these streams. I am too. I'm going to try to get more of those little nice moments to clear out as a palate cleanser of all the crap we have to deal with. Too creative for drunks. That quilt is so hard to make, and can I explain why it's really difficult? Okay. So, again, I'll switch sides. You can see. It requires really precise cutting, and so you start to get some of these corners. It's a little overlit there, yeah, but these round bits here, you have to do them in both colors, and they have to match up correctly. And not only that, you have to get the dimensions correct each time so that they look symmetrical, as opposed to like this one's being thick and this one's being really narrow and all kind of wonky. Now, I didn't do this free form. You get a pattern that you iron on, which is really good. You get a pattern that you iron on, and then you cut around that so it's perfect, and you have enough room on your fabric to make sure everything is the right size. And then when I did so then you have to sew all the bits together, right? But when you've sewn it all together, that's not done. That's just the front of it. The quilting actually comes when you add the back. And the back, you can't see this at all. That's just going to wash out. But the back of this just has, the only pattern it has is the sewing machine pattern that's left over. So quilting actually comes, when you put the back layer with the filler, because there's a filler in here, with the front, and then you unite those three with a sewing machine or by hand, back women in the day, goddesses, I swear, with different patterns. And I don't do quilting anymore with fabric, but I feel very much that I quilt with video now. Editing a video is a lot like quilting. Quilting is taking a couple big pieces of fabric, cutting them down into smaller pieces, and then sewing them back together to make a big piece of fabric. And a video is you record a lot of instances of images and audio, and then you cut it down into little pieces, and then you select the ones you want and you edit them together into a big piece of video and audio again. So I feel very much that quilting and video editing are two different parts of the same thing that I like to do, which is a bit of a puzzle solving, anything like that. Kristi wonders, if you were to play a video game for charity, what would be my choice? If I were going to do old school, it would probably be Galaga. I loved Galaga. It was such an awesome game, and that's why when it was in the one of the Avengers movies, I think the first one, when Tony Stark just sort of is delivering his line and then points and says, "That guy over there is playing Galaga." Thought we wouldn't notice. And I was like, yay for Galaga. So old school video game, I would probably play that. Another one that would be a possibility. This is going to go old school. Pitfall. With the alligators and the pits. Dude, that game was awesome. Okay. I'm not lagging anymore. Hurrah. I don't know if that was when I did the Washington Post thing. The Washington Post had some dumb Roger Stone gif that it was playing over and over and over again. I think that was part of the problem. Good on the lag now. Woohoo! Yeah, I'm going to blame the Washington Post. Officially. Mike, by silent majority, it's shite. I don't doubt it. Good books are not easy to write. They're really not. It's can I just go off on a tangent here? I think I've said this before. I like the puzzle of a whodunit, and I prefer more fiction. You know, like a Holmes or Jonathan Creek, Elementary, something along those lines. I have, because of podcast, gotten into more true crime, and that's a little harder just because it's about real people. The nice thing about fictional murder mysteries is that nobody really dies. So even in the most gruesome, or horrific fictional crime story, you still, nobody gets hurt. It's all fantasy. But then there is a really interesting thing for me looking back historically. I started listening to a podcast called Most Notorious Podcast. Really good. The guy's based in Minnesota. It's like, he's still from Minnesota, but he's all right. No, just joking. And I was listening to a story on the podcast. I mentioned this before, I think, you guys. There we go. About one of the podcasts was about a serial killer in Nazi Germany. And last week's or 2 weeks ago, there was one on a serial killer in France during the First World War, I think it was. And the thing that, of course, they both have in common is, in this case, the serial killer was operating in cities in the country where most of the men in the police force were off at the front lines or have been, compelled to serve. And that means that the police force back in the countries are overstretched, and you also have women who have to take up more of this room in the economy. So it really becomes a perfect breeding ground for serial killers in those war situations. And of course, I'm thinking about European cities, but I would imagine that's actually a huge phenomenon wherever there is war. Anyway, the podcast episode was a really fascinating story. I'm looking back now and realizing part of the reason it was a really good story is because the person who does the podcast is actually better at constructing the stories than the guy who wrote the book. But the story about Paul Agorso, the S-Bahn killer, on the podcast was absolutely fascinating. But then when I got the book, which I did pay money for because I was so fascinated by the story, I wanted to learn more. The book is awful. The book was terribly written. And I feel really bad saying that, but I just want, like, when I started reading it myself, I wanted to start editing it on the fly, like I do with a peer review. Like, you've already said the sentence at the beginning of the previous page. You don't need to repeat yourself. And I'm like going through. I have this idea that someday I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to go to Berlin as a reason as a pretext, and I want to do a video about this story about the S-Bahn killer, because it is absolutely fascinating. It's not fascinating because of the murders per se. It's not the gruesomeness of the murders or anything in that way. It's the fact that it took place during wartime, how the Nazis regime inhibited the police investigation, how the police had to work through a lot of evidence to come to find Agorzo. And what's fascinating, not fascinating, that's the wrong word. I don't want to talk about serial killers and say the word fascinating, but what is unique about Agorzo was that his modus operandi changed twice, at least. You can maybe say 3 times during the time that he was active as a sexual predator, eventually escalating up to a murder. And that was before we had forensic science or any of the criminal behavioral units to understand people's psychology. Most of the cases of escalation is a killer who does the same thing and then just escalates upwards. He gets more violent, or the space between attacks or murders decreases as he needs more and more of a high to maintain that feeling of satisfaction the first murder gave him. Sick to say, but it is, like brain chemistry. You can understand it in that kind of addiction terms. We know about, people need more alcohol to get drunk. You need more drugs, right? So we understand that psychology, but he changed his location, the kinds of attacks he did, and everything. And so the fact that the police department in Berlin, constrained by Nazi propaganda requirements, they limited the media coverage. They didn't want to include the public in information calls and stuff like that. The officer in charge, I think I've mentioned this before on other shows, was not a Nazi. He was very, very late joining the Nazi party because he wasn't interested. He had to do it to keep his job. And the lead detective on this case later became an informant, or worked with the CIA to help spy on the Soviets after the Second World War. So he was definitely not, he was in Nazi Germany, but he was not sympathetic, and he was a detective, not a Nazi. So there we go. All right, getting back to it. Did I see the article in The Guardian about the BBC guy asking the Irish European minister why Ireland doesn't just leave the EU and join the UK? Chris, yeah, I saw reactions to that. What a moron. It's a symbol of the lack of self-awareness. Like, yeah, why don't you quit and join our club? Because then we could be together. Because we tried to occupy you a couple times and it almost worked out. So we just kept like half your country, but we could be like a couple again. This is, that idiot to the Irish. Like, wow, sometimes you guys don't get it. Sometimes people just do not get it. Bruce says he was thinking more of the hard sciences in his earlier quote. Should physicists, be emotionally trained? I think that when it comes to the natural sciences generally, there is a real problem with the lack of philosophical training in the natural sciences. Because of that lack of philosophical respect for the idea that knowledge is generated by humans and is therefore as flawed as any human creating it. I think the natural sciences, because they deal with observation and measurement and numbers and equations, they feel like they have a greater claim on truth. But those truths, mathematics, are merely a description of what you're seeing. And that add up, that are balanced on both sides of the equation in some cases. I don't know all the reasons why people do mathematical calculations, but presumably everyone has to have like an answer, right? A balance on the sides of the left and the right side of the equation. It can look independent of human construction, but numbers are human constructs. And the way that we measure things is a metric, like what is a mile or whatever else. All of that is human construction. And so, yeah, there's that role that people don't see in it. They just assume is somehow fixed and independent of mind. And in terms of, I think there are less, perhaps, sciences that deal with humans, like ones that are biased toward, with racism or whatever else. I think medical sciences, those sorts of things, definitely have to have that kind of self-awareness. I think it's less of a possibility that an emotional bias would point someone in the wrong direction on, say, physics. Although that being said, Albert Einstein notoriously was skeptical and rather hostile toward quantum physics as a deterministic atomic theorist where everything had its, a right answer. The idea of answering in a probability was very emotionally unsettling to Einstein. But that doesn't make quantum physics any less true. Okay. Physicists can be a little bit on the nerdy dorks. Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's good too. I see that there's a super chat coming up, so I am coming to you. All right, scrolling down. Jonathan Krieg. John also loves Jonathan Krieg. Yeah, he's really Alan Davies is massively underrated as an actor. I agree. There was a time in my life, a very sad time, actually. My grandmother was terminally ill, and it was just, like the last 2 weeks was just kind of waiting for the phone call. And I was so emotionally sensitive, at the time. Just waiting anytime the phone rang or I got a text message, that sort of, is this the call? And it was Christmas time as well, so I was in the UK, I was on my own. It was Christmas time, and I was waiting for that phone call. Just, she had made the decision to stop treatment for her heart problem or kidney problem. The only thing I could watch was Jonathan Krieg. It was like, for some reason, that little bubble, like being safe for that 60 minutes or whatever episode, like that kind of got me through, which is a bit weird. But I am grateful to Jonathan Krieg for that. Watched a video today by a guy named Mundane Matt about a true crime scenario. Mundane Matt, oh yeah, Mundane Matt has got a lot of baggage on YouTube, and he could also be into true crime. That's absolutely fine, but just know that he's got a whole bunch of baggage with him. All right, looking for in whodunits, do I prefer to not know who it is to the end of the book, Columbo style, or do you want to know the show and how the murder was done, but you have to figure it out how Columbo figured it out? Phil Hill asks. That's actually a really good point. I think both. I don't have a preference in terms of those narratives, because you get two psychologically different approaches to the whodunit. So if you come into the show and you know whodunit from the beginning, then what you're watching is a psychological game of sort of cat and mouse between the detective and the killer. So you're looking to evaluate, chess on that level. Does the killer hide his or her? How does the killer hide his or her actions? How do they set up their alibi? How does the police officer or the investigator, how does he or she go about unpacking it and getting on the scent of the correct perpetrator? And I think that those psychological mano a mano is interesting. I think a take on that would perhaps be like The Silence of the Lambs is an example. I mean, obviously, the whodunit, the person is Bill, but Hopkins is guilty, and he's playing that game with Jodie Foster, and it's a psychological, battle between the monster and the person that we identify with in the story, the hero or heroine of the story. If it's a true whodunit, then you have the experience of going through, well, whatever the director of the show allows you to see. So in those cases, like an Agatha Christie or a Poirot or some of the Sherlock Holmes stories, as a viewer, well, this gets back to why Sherlock is garbage and always has been, that H. Bomber guy did about the Sherlock Holmes series with Benedict Cumberbatch. There's an agreement that you have in that scenario of a whodunit, that whatever is on screen, whatever you're shown, whatever dialogue is presented to you, as a viewer, that's fair game for you to interpret that information in order to solve the whodunit along with the detective. That's the agreement between the audience and the writer of the story, that you're going on the ride with the detective, and he or she is meant to be there to be your eyes and ears, to point out, ask questions sort of on your behalf. And the idea is if you're presented with the same information, in theory, you should be able to get to the same answer the detective does by the end of the show. And Poirot, Agatha Christie, they're just really classic examples of the whole reveal. They get everybody in a room, all the suspects, and there's a few red herrings, and then the real culprit is revealed. I like both of those. I think they have different just aspects of the human psychology, human psyche, and that process. So I don't have a preference. That's a really long answer, but it's a very good question too. Mundane Matt is a bit of a scumbag. Agreed. I'll just put that on there. Hey HK, thank you for the $10.99 or the $10.99, the $9.99 pounds. So let's see what your question is. Sorry, I wasn't asking, okay, this is a clarification from a previous point. I wasn't asking about accidentally racist people. I was asking, can algorithms exhibit accidental racism? And hence, people can then use innocent data as a smokescreen. Thanks. Yes, I think algorithms can exhibit a racism that is perhaps unconsciously embedded in there by a programmer, and then the outcomes would also reflect that. And it might not have been a conscious decision. Like there might have just been some stereotype assumption that was put into the algorithm. If you're looking at, trying to predict some sort of population issues or behaviors or recidivism or I don't know what. But yes, if you built in to if your theory behind the algorithm is racist, I mean, and it's racist because it has a certain take on the data, or it selects the data in a certain way, or it has a certain way of interpreting the data based on a bias, not on reality. Then yeah, and that will then taint the data all the way through. This is why I go on and on about the way that things are socially constructed. And so when people want to say, oh, sex is a binary. And you're just like, well, no, if you go back and unpack what constitutes sex, there are multiple things. There's primary characteristics and secondary characteristics, and there are hormones, and there's a genetic component, and there's a biological component, and it's very complicated, right? So we want certainty. Especially some people who can't tolerate ambiguity, and some people's brains are just set up in such a way that they don't find ambiguity comfortable. They like to know a right or a wrong answer. Those people also tend to be a little bit more authoritarian, and they also tend to go into the police service and the military, where you have clear moral, structures. That is something that we know is reflected in our populations. And so for those people, ambiguity is difficult, but I think you have to always treat every finding with a little bit of like, this could maybe change. This could maybe be wrong. So yes, thanks for clarifying that, HK. You're awesome. Aren't science stories and biographies the best detective stories? Yeah, there's a really great book called Science a History. It's on my shelf in the other room. Maybe, and I'm thinking my knee is starting to ache, so I'm thinking we're starting to get onto the time for a break, and we've been going for about 50 minutes now. And in a lot of ways, the discovery of anything is a mystery. It's a bit of a detective story because it's a process of elimination. It's trying to find a right answer to a question and going about it in a lot of different ways. Or in the case of sometimes, science accidentally discovers things. And that too. How do you accidentally discover something? That is it's a bit of a, I find that a bit of a mystery story as well. Right. So again, when I scan down, I will look for things that have me tagged in or say question or somehow are trying to get my attention, because it's a lot to read, and my eyes start to glaze as I see you guys going back and forth. That's not just because I don't want to read your back and forth to the audience. My voice is so soothing. Thank you, Simone. That's really nice. I think oh, we got 10 viewers. Well, it is crazy early in the morning in the States, and I think a lot of them probably come and watch afterwards. This is our European time, you guys. This is Sunday mornings in Europe, and it is very much more for my European audience, because I live my life. So I see a couple questions, so I'll get to those. But I live my life so often tied to East Coast time. And I have to, in my head, keep track of at least 3, sometimes 4 time zones: Central, Eastern, UK, and my own time zone. Then I have to also be aware of when the time changes are in each country, because it's not the same all over. And I get so fed up of it. I get so tired of having to do math on the fly in my head every time I want to schedule a show. That's why I said I'm having a Sunday at 12 o'clock show that's just going to be my standard, and it's going to be for my European viewers. So this is for you guys. And the Americans can watch me on the happy hour. What is my opinion on heteronormativity? Simone, that's a really great question. I think that heteronormativity, so to define that, it's the assumption that what is normal, what is proper, and what is good is heterosexuality. The heteronormativity is the sort of base assumption for every ad you see of a woman splayed out, looking sexy to advertise perfume. The assumption is she's trying to make herself attractive for men. Or if you have a plot line in a story, it's going to involve a heterosexual couple. And I do feel that in many ways, heteronormativity has cracked and is breaking down. I can see it in my lifetime. Now, I'm getting pretty effing old. So I'm going to be not quite 50. I've got a couple of years to 50, but 50 is a number that's in my not too distant future. And I very much recall, and it only gets worse as you go farther back, a lot of the assumptions about a romantic attraction, and when you talk to somebody, you assume they're straight. You just assume every love story you're going to see is straight, every ad, everything around you reflects heterosexuality. Let me clear my throat for a second. Ooh. And I see that changing. I see a huge change. Now, it's not enough of a change, but people are now at least aware that they won't ask, about your wife. They will maybe ask about your spouse. Or, are you married? Do you have a partner? As opposed to assuming that the person they're meeting is going to be straight. And I know that that's not enough. I know it's not enough. But it is, in that way, a good and important step forward. And as we see more gay couples in the media, represented in our stories, represented in our sports, represented in our news, as newscasters, I think, Don Lemon, he's gay, right? And so he talks about his life. There was a guy on MSNBC, I don't see him as much anymore, but he was married, and his partner, I think he might have moved over to the Today Show or something. And maybe that's John Roberts, is that what his name is? I can't remember. I haven't seen him in ages, so maybe that's it. And he talks about his husband, and the more that happens, the better it will be. So that is my opinion on heteronormativity. I understand why it exists in the culture, but I also see that it needs to be broken down to make more space and more room for non-heterosexual couples. Pris says, most discoveries in physics go, huh? That's weird. I wouldn't doubt it. I think a lot that does happen in the it happens in the social sciences as well, where you test a theory that has meant to, work in these situations. And in your data, so you test a theory from like 30 years ago to see if you can replicate the results with the new data set. And it's nothing like it. And you go, oh, okay, well, is that, and this is, I think, a problem in the natural sciences as much as the social sciences. You think, is this an artifact of my sample, or am I onto something new here? And until you do more repeated tests, that's sort of hard to say. Of course, if you have a big enough survey sample, then you could take smaller samples and replicate it to see if you can get it across your own internal sample. But that's, bootstrapping. I'm not going to get into. 10 likes. Oh, 10 not viewers. I have 33 viewers. Oh, thanks you guys for tuning in. Welcome on a Sunday. We are also, of course, just about to go into the break because my coffee is getting cold. My leg needs to be stretched, and we're going to talk a bit more in the next hour. We're going to warm up with soft, cushy, nice things, and then maybe we'll talk a bit more politics, and I'll chat with you guys a bit more than two. But I'm going to try to catch up with what there is now. Question from Bruce. Sorry, I have to cough again. All right. I heard on Ocean Scoring that the conservatives score low on openness and as a consequence are prone to believe conspiracy theories. Are progressives prone to similar failings? Well, you do see the anti-vaxxers on the liberal side or on the progressive side. That has been a critique. So being politically left or right won't be a protection against conspiracy theories. I think it's the different kinds of basis for the conspiracy theory. So I think in terms of any large enough population, you're going to see representation from every possible category of person. And so in terms of the tendency to believe in conspiracy theories, that does, it is, I think, noted. It's empirically verified that does happen more on the right, but progressives, our side is not free from that kind of nonsense as well, and we should be just as harsh on conspiracy theories, like anti-vax conspiracy theories from the left, as anyone else. I smashed that like button before it was popular. Thank you, James. All right. Yeah. Okay, you guys are checking. All right. The feeling you get in any science when the penny drops and you see something no one else in history has, that's cool. I did have a little bit of that feeling with my thesis. Okay, it was a little tiny thing, but my PhD supervisor told me that if I could make the biological variable consistently non-significant, that would be, because I was trying to measure a psychological attributes associated with gender. So if you are, let's say, competitive and aggressive and independent, that is associated with positive things for masculinity, but clearly it's not limited to just men. And therefore, if a woman has those personality or has those as goals as well, like she thinks aggression is good, competitiveness is good, and independence is just being very self-sufficient, going out and making your way in the world, if those are things that she values and practices, is that a better predictor of her political leanings and vote choice than her biological status as a woman? And in my modeling, I did repeatedly make the sex variable insignificant, and what was taking its place in the model were those gendered attributes. So I could see that there was a step before you get a biological category that we were missing. We had an attitude, and then we had man, woman. But what we were missing in the middle were the gendered attributes that mediate. And it might be informed by, as a woman, you might be raised and socialized in a certain way. But if you assume that the socialization is 100% mapped onto the gender norms, the sort of 1950s gender norms, then our biological category is it's basically carrying more theoretical weight than it should. It's trying to explain sociological contributing or causal factors, when really it's not even measuring that. It's merely a physical measurement, like brown hair or blue eyes, and now we're linking sex to causality because we're assuming a sociological connection rather than measuring whether a sociological connection is well represented by the man-woman category. Anyway, I'm going really deep into the nerdy stuff now. So should we all take a bathroom break or refill your coffee break? And we'll come back, and in the next section, before I come back, I will try to make some coffee. Wrong way, this way. Make some coffee and set us up for some Washington Post. Now that we're a little bit warmed up, we had a nice morning chat. We talked about quilting. We talked about philosophy. We talked about serial killers. I couldn't really put this down on the agenda or people wouldn't believe it. This is the most random freaking show ever. So let's all get on with our refreshment, whatever. You want to get some fresh air. And then we'll come back in about 5 minutes. So I see Joe West says, I looked up Mundane Matt and he looks to be one of those people from Sargon's camp. His videos are disliked a lot as well. Yes, there's all kinds of... Okay, last thing. All right, I'm just going to put this out here. Yes, oh no, I just heard my coffee machine is shutting itself down. So we're going to have to take maybe a 7-minute break while I warm that back up. But Mundane Matt is a bit of a div, and he is definitely in Sargon's camp. He was a bit big during the Gamergate thing, but has sort of lost his way by getting involved in a lot of drama. And I'm noticing often that when I see the internet blood sports types talk about things and drama in their community, and it's Tonka Saw, it's Andy Worski, it's Jim, it's Mr. Medicare, it's Ethan Ralph, and all of the people in there. I mean, the whole Coach Red Pill, all of this, it's all men. And when they complain about each other, they compare each other to teenage girls. And the fact is, when I see these IBS people complaining, they have drama on levels like the teenage girls couldn't even imagine. And so I think we should just talk about drama like an IBS, internet blood sports dude, rather than like a teenage girl. All right, so Sir Toby, still treating my hangover with Gelston? What's this coffee you speak of? You know what I do for hangovers? I don't have them as often now. Because when I first got here, I socialized a lot in Cologne, and I drank a lot of Kolsch, and I've had to kind of build up my tolerance. But now that I have, I like tomato juice. Well, actually, more like a virgin Bloody Mary. So something with a vegetable juice, maybe a little bit of Tabasco to give it heat, just to like kind of warm your body up, get your temperature up, processing all of that stuff. It's been on the salty side, and it's got vitamin E and other vitamins in it. So that was my hangover remedy, is vegetable juice basically with a little bit of Worcestershire sauce and a tap or two on the bottle of Tabasco, and mix that up. Yum yum. Opinion on Shoe on Head. Is Shoe on Head still relevant? I mean, really, what has Shoe on Head done, Simone? In ever. She pretty much was famous for shitting on women who were trying to help other women. That's kind of my impression. She was a person who sold out women, other women's liberation and other women's emancipation to appeal to bigots and sexists and young boys who found strong, confident women threatening, and bats her eyes and is trying to act like she's about 17 to 19 for the rest of her life. I mean, am I wrong on any of that? And then Joe says, when we get back from the break, yes, we're definitely going to go on the break. I would love to hear your opinion on Sargon saying he's 1 degree separation from Trump. Okay, we'll do that. Now, also, I want to say that this is something you guys should know about me. When I say I'm going to get going, I'm about 20 minutes away from actually getting going. When I say, all right, guys, I'm going to get going, it means I'm thinking now about actually getting going, but I'm not going anywhere. So if you start checking out and I go, okay, guys, I'm going to get going, you're like, all right, Kristi, bye. You're probably going to miss 20 minutes of this show. Because that's how it was when I grew up. When I grew up and the families got together for birthdays or holidays, we were kids who were running around playing, doing pitfall on the computer, or just like running around the rooms being kids because you have all that energy and you're hyper. And the adults would say, hey, kids, all right, get your coats on. We're going to get going. It took me very few times of getting my coat on and then waiting. And when the adults are the whole time to realize I have to be told 3 times. Look, it's not until they told me the 3rd time that we're going that we're actually going. That's the same with me. So I am now, though, really going to get going. I'm going to put it back on the pre-show window. I've even sized this up a little bit now for you guys, and I'm going to rearrange it a bit, and it's all set up. So, bathroom break, coffee break, fresh air break, cigarette break, take a nap, whatever you want to do, and we will come back. It's now 4 minutes after the hour. Let's come back at 10 minutes after the hour. All right, guys, I'll catch you again in a few minutes. Until then, bye. Hey, sorry I'm a little bit late getting back. As you might have seen, I've got a slightly different angle here now because this lets me sit with my legs more out. So rather than being this way, I'm sort of more in the corner. You guys might recognize part of that from older videos of mine. But, oh, yeah, never mind. So I switched it, hopefully with the lighting. My glass glare won't be too awful for you guys. But this was the setup I had when Kevin and I had our show the other night, and it was quite comfortable. So I'm trying it out on the Sunday show. As you know, I'm sat on my bed. My apartment's very tiny. I don't need much space. I don't have a lot of things. So trying to stay more comfortable so I don't end the show faster, simply because my knee is starting to ache. I just have to make sure I look at the camera right. Yeah. Right, so I told you guys that I would look at a few more of your comments. So let me go ahead and change that to the other screen where I can see your stuff. So, yeah, I'm going to have to practice with this setup. This is going to be new. So, yeah. Oh, it was a question about Sargon, wasn't it? The question about Sargon saying he's 1 degree of separation from Trump. Hey, I shook Al Gore's hand, so that puts me in one. Well, actually, I set up an event with him, fundraising back in the 90s when he was still vice president. I think Carl. Yeah, well, Carl's not so smart, is he? He's very loud. He's a bully, and he likes to bully people. But he's not very well reasoned, he's not well read, and his opinions are worthless. So it doesn't matter who he's got 1 degree of separation from, he's still a moron. At least, can Carl get more despicable? I did see him say, what was it along the lines of I'm not sure how to pronounce it correctly, but the president of Brazil, who, the right-wing asshole who just came in, and Carl's, oh, I looked a little bit laggy there. Carl's approach was, oh, well, he pisses off, he fights communists and he pisses off the liberals. So I like him. And I just thought, you could have said the same thing about Hitler, Carl. Hitler and the Nazis hated the communists and pissed off progressive people who believe in human rights. So that's your standard. Well, we know about Carl. He's a bigoted idiot. Sabrina says she was also call a black woman a gorilla. Oh yeah, June is a piece of shit. Sorry, yeah. I mean, I don't. Shoe on head, June is generally like a person who wants desperately to be liked, and tries to get. It seems like she just tries to get away with a lot of things by being a cute girl. And you know, when you get to be a woman in your 30s, you just can't sell that anymore. So I don't know what she's gonna do once she can't just bat her eyelid and say bigoted, awful things. Going to go now and be like, no, bye, Jim. We won't see this because you're already gone. Okay, looking down here. Kristi Winters, how do you think treatment of women is different in the US versus Europe? Well, Europe is a massive continent, collection of countries. And so I think it's more difficult to generalize about Europe than it is to generalize about the United States, because it's a series of different cultures. So in Scandinavian countries, I think women are the most equal and have the most opportunity of anywhere in the world. I just do. I think that's... Am I a little soft now that I've moved my... I'm going to turn this up a little bit, just so the sensitivity is a bit higher, I think closer to what it was before. So, that's as close as I can get without bumping the camera. And in that way, the laws and the books, the attitudes, just the fact that men are, you're very likely to see 2 guys out with strollers in a Scandinavian country or the Nordic countries than you are in, say, Italy or Greece. So there's a north-south divide in Europe, too, when it comes to attitudes toward women. What you find is that, countries that are, especially the Catholic countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, France has, I'm not saying that being Protestant makes you an egalitarian, but there is it seems to be an association with Catholicism in Southern Europe, where machismo and really vile attitudes to women linger. I know that several friends of mine, Greek women, preferred dating guys who were British because they weren't sexist pigs like Greek men. You know, and they would say Greek men basically want to marry a version of their moms that they can fuck. They want someone to feed them and clothe them and, or, you know, do their laundry and make their meals and emotionally support and nourish them while also providing a sexual service. And that's not an egalitarian relationship. You know, that's a sexualized mom. So I think that in the United States, women relative to parts of Europe have it better and have it worse. That's just true. I think a lot of the healthcare things are worse for women in the United States compared to European women in general. There are some places with more abortion freedoms, you know, than in other parts of Europe. I think it's easier to get an abortion in parts of the United States, obviously other parts, than in Germany. I think there are more general restrictions. I mean, I haven't been pregnant and had to need an abortion, but from what I've read about the abortion laws, they're a little bit more restrictive. So pros and cons everywhere. I think we should all look to the Nordic model and Scandinavian countries and all of that more Northern European secular. This is, you know, also really important. Tend to be secular countries that treat women better. Again, that link with Catholicism, not just Catholicism, religiosity, I should say. Switzerland, for instance, those guys are, you know, sexist AF. They didn't allow women to vote till the 1970s, and they were Calvinists. So it's not like Protestantism is a solution here. It's secularism. Kristi, are you saying Sargon isn't as smart as he thinks he is? No. Every time I deal with him, this is it. I mean, it's so different now dealing with Carl on Twitter, because when I first interacted with him, he had, you know, he would send out a tweet and your mentions, you get 600 people, literally hundreds of people just dogpiling you. And then he got his ass kicked because he's a jerk and he couldn't follow the rules because he thinks he's special. And that is as a consequence of that. Do you guys want to see big me or little me? I don't know if it really matters, but I'll put that up for a change because we did the other one before. He's so dumb. The guy is so dumb. And I'm serious. It's so easy now. When he first, you know, got onto the Twitter, he would say anything and people would praise him. And now that he's been taken down a notch, my strategy for dealing with Carl is he desperately needs an audience. That's what a bully needs. A bully needs followers. And that way they know their power is they put a spotlight on somebody and then they just watch as their minions descend. And then they go, oh, I can't control my followers. Well, with Carl getting his ass booted off of Twitter because he's an idiot, bigot, harassing, abusive jerk who can't learn how to control his words or his actions on Twitter. Yes, Greek Orthodox. Yeah, that is a good point. The Greeks aren't Catholic, they are Orthodox. But that's still, I wanted to contrast it with Protestantism and Lutheranism. So, but yes, well noted, Greek Orthodox is not Catholicism. But when it came to Carl, now if he tries to dogpile me, I mass block everybody who likes his tweets. Because I don't want to just block everybody who follows Sargon, Carl, because there's a lot of people who hate follow him. People who follow him just to make fun of him. And so I don't want to just do like a block bot. So when he tries to engage with me, he might get 50, at the most 50 or 60 people who like his tweet. And I'll just mass block them because it denies him his audience. And I found that since I started doing that, he's been leaving me alone. Because it doesn't get the reaction. If the people he is most likely to incite to attack me can't see my tweets, then it defeats the purpose for him to try to draw attention to me. So that's for you, Carl. Yeah, papist countries are probably worse than the U.S. There's a lot of Catholics who are quite progressive around the world. However, it's the institutions, it's the attitudes. It's like the rape culture that keeps it going. And also, you know, some men have been raised to think that they have value in being superior to women. That somehow, you know, by virtue of having a masculine man body, this gives them an inherent value that is greater than actually the people who do the reproductive work for creating the next generation of life. And that does tend to map on highly to religiosity. I think a lot of religiosity is bullshit power claims based on the magic power of the penis that doesn't really exist. Making God masculine, giving God, the masculine God, authorizing men to hold executive power on that God's behalf. I mean, it's all a big con. And it holds women back. Democratic primary, thoughts and predictions. I think we're going to have a very exciting primary. I think there's going to be probably a pretty high drop-off rate. I think that you might think of it a bit like when a new environmental space, physically in the environment, sees a new life form, and when you get a place where a life or a species or something enters a new area, you get a lot of variety, you get a lot of different expansion of mutations, and then eventually the environment will hone down those variations to a species that's shaped, according to the selective pressures of that environment. And I think that with the Democratic primary, we're going to see every kind of Democrat run. Every kind of, progressive on economics or on the environment or representative of this kind of perspective or community. We're probably going to have up to 20 candidates. And I think the first, wave, there'll be a lot of people who show interest, a lot of people who throw their hats in the ring. And that first selective pressure, shall we say, of the primary process will be who can fundraise, who can actually sustain an operation financially. And that will be the first selective pressure that will filter out candidates who cannot compete in that selective pressure as much as others. End of the day, the American primary system, American election system, is not about who has the best ideas. It's just not. It's about who can get their message across to the voters most effectively to get them to turn out, and that usually means who has the most money. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, don't piss on Nancy Pelosi for raising money and getting a House majority in a system that will destroy you if you don't raise money. So, I know that there's a tendency to blame individuals for taking corporate donations or to blame individuals for raising money from PACs. And some kind of virtue signaling bullshit about, I'm not going to take PAC money. Political action committees were designed to clean up politics by making it more accountable as to who was giving the money. It could be traceable, right? And then that becomes somehow you can't take PAC money. So you're limited to just getting $20 donations at a time from people who have, very little in terms of funds. And the fact is that it's more cost effective to raise $1 million with a bunch of big checks than through $20 donations. It's just more time intensive. And so you can understand how the system itself drives people to those kinds of efficiencies, and then that gives corporations and people with money leverage. And so it's a system problem. I got on a whole tangent here. But whether or not a Democratic candidate can compete by raising money, either through, with union support or whatever other fundraising support they have in combination with a good message and a good staff, we're going to see a primary that's very lively, that is probably going to be pretty bitter. And I think in the end, like any good selection process, should hopefully put the candidate, that is the most electable. That's the candidate I usually back, which is, I would rather have somebody who's slightly to the right of me politically in power than somebody who's way to the right of me in power. And that's how I look at my choices. I don't put in my dream, perfect, progressive, lefty candidate because I know that person has to be elected in Iowa and in Kansas. It's not just California and New York and the big progressive cities that vote. We have to have a candidate that can appeal to every kind, independents, people in the center as well as people on the left. All right, I have a whole bunch of stuff in here, so I'm going to scroll down now. You guys can think. Who is the Thinkery? The Thinkery is just Carl Benjamin's channel where he goes to do even less organized videos. Democratic Prime. Oh, that one I got. I'll show that. I don't know. That's kind of mean. I don't know anything about Greek dick. So, I mean, if you're speaking from experience, I guess. I don't know that stereotype, though, so. Not all corporations are bad, though the majority are. I agree. I also think that corporations, the way that business operates, I think the norms of capitalism encourage sociopathy in individuals. I think that because the kind of Machiavellian tactics are rewarded in the business situation, you know, this is why we have to have really strong laws about controlling capitalism and reining in capitalism and stopping capitalism from enacting its own worst tendencies. The biggest problem I see with capitalism is that it tends to aggregate wealth to a smaller and smaller group of people, and that is actually undermining to capitalism. Capitalism's own natural sort of physical, not like physical as like physics, like trajectory, you know, like if you're doing you're whipping something around and you get the centrifugal force, right? Like I feel like capitalism has those natural forces, and that force to centralize monopolies are an outcome of capitalism because it's more cost effective to have one company doing the same job than 1,000 companies doing it in slightly different ways or whatever else, right? So we have to break up that natural tendency of capitalism. We tried to in the past, and I think we have to do more on it. Anyway, how did I get on this topic? You can raise money without a political action committee. Yeah, but sure, but it's just harder, right? The point of a political action committee is that it allows you to bundle money from a bunch of different people, right? So you know where it's coming from. Like unions have political action committees, and Planned Parenthood has a political action committee. The point of it is it's a registration issue. You know, I can give $20 to Planned Parenthood to go to its PAC. That doesn't make it evil. Now that it's PAC money, it's still my $20. So is it somehow more pure because if I give it directly to the candidate rather than give it to Planned Parenthood, who's doing a whole bunch of stuff to say, hey, as Planned Parenthood? I think that's my point of why people demonize PACs. I think it's stupid because it's the same money that you're getting, right? But in this case, if I give $20 to Planned Parenthood to donate, what I'm saying with that $20 is I am using Planned Parenthood's PAC as a vehicle to support candidates for choice. If I just give $20 to Hillary Clinton, it can mean anything, right? So there's that $20 path isn't tainted simply because it goes through a PAC. That's my point. I don't know what the AOC model is, but if it's all straight donor donations, then that's a whole lot of work. It's just more expensive. I mean, look, if you as a candidate only want to get direct contributions in $5 and $10 checks, that's fine. I'm just saying it's going to be way more expensive for you to run your fundraising operation. And as a consequence, you're going to spend less of your money that you get from the fundraising on communicating with voters. You're going to end up spending money, that $5 you raised from grandma, to get another $5 from grandma in 6 months. And PACs just cut the cost and time and effort of collecting money while also holding people accountable because you have PAC limits and reporting things and other stuff that you have to do as a PAC to be transparent. So, anyone else? I think the left should appeal to the left or repeat 2016. If you live in a congressional district that's super lefty, go for it. If you live in Dane County in Madison and you want I voted for Mark Pocan. I know Mark Pocan when he was in the state assembly, for instance. He's an awesome guy. He's a perfect representative for Dane County, Madison, that liberal city, the university, the ethos of it, everything. If you're in rural Wisconsin, you can't run Mark Pocan and win. And this is my problem with people who want to impose lefty candidates on centrist constituencies. The point is not to impose our will on the voters so that they have to choose our candidates so we can enact our policies. The point is to get representation of people, and different constituencies need flexible representation to truly be representative. You can elect Communist Party people all the way down the line, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're representing their constituents. And that's why I think it's that AOC is great for her district. And, you know, I'm Ron Kind in Wisconsin, who represents Western Wisconsin, who is more in touch with farmers and has to balance out those more conservative, land-based, you know, farmer needs and their worries with college cities, in college towns. So I don't think, I'm very much against putting super left candidates on non-super left districts because they'll lose. I've watched enough lefty Dems go down as sacrificial lambs in moderate districts because, you know, they didn't make a convincing case. All right, what else can we say? It's not the same money, though. For example, look up the Congressional Black Caucus PAC. It's run by tobacco corporations. You know, you can, is your problem PACs or is your problem corporations? Is your problem the Political Action Committee or the kinds of people who donate? If it's the problem of the kinds of people who donate, the PAC itself, take away the PACs, you're still going to get that corporate influence. I'm just saying, look at the real problem and not the symptom. Oh, is Amelia from Kevin's show in the chat? Hey, happy Sunday. Is that you? I did watch part of it last night, but I also was in the middle of watching something on Netflix, so I was going to save that. I came into the Kevin stream when they were talking about, it was a really interesting part about how the transphobic critique works in the LGBT community, which I'd always heard the feminist side of it. So I have a former friend. She's a former friend because she's turfy as shit. And she said something so bigoted that if it had been about a black person, she would have been banned from Twitter. And so she said something awful about Riley Dennis. And I don't know Riley Dennis, like personally. I've interacted with her and had her content. So it wasn't like I was going to the wall for a super big friend of mine. But this former friend of mine just said something so transphobic. I was like, I can't even deal with you anymore. I just can't fucking deal with you. And the former turfy friend's argument was, yes, if you can do self-gender assignment in the UK, then men are going to assign themselves as women in order to enter bathrooms and attack women. And I just thought that was the stupidest fucking thing I'd ever heard. Seriously. Like, the fact that I could see Sargon actually trying this on as a troll, that I'm going to declare myself a woman and say he's going to go through with it. But of course the legal ramifications for him doing it are so massive that it becomes practically impossible. So this thought experiment, but if we don't require people to get permission from a doctor, if we don't treat adults like they're adults who can make these decisions on their own, then it's all going to go wrong. And that one I'd heard before, but the transphobic argument to the LGBT community was one I was not familiar with. And then of course there's just the transphobia that they use, that TERFs use to ally themselves with, the Christian conservatives and fascist types. So, look, I'm getting out of questions. Good. So we must be getting, about an hour and a half in. Should we look a little bit? I'll talk a little bit about the news, maybe, and then we'll wrap it up. We've been pretty Trump-free this episode, which has been nice. But on the other hand, I also feel like it's not quite a show if I don't talk about politics. WAPO, Washington Post. There we go. Right. This is actually a good story. I think that little bit of Roger Stone over there was my laggy bit before. Yeah, I think this is we're starting to finally see some political gravity that never seemed to hit Trump is finally hitting Trump. And it might be, I don't know, I mean, for the Republicans it might be too little too late. We'll have to wait and see, but it does feel like finally, there are some cracks happening. And one of the things we know that typically is said is that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. The Republicans, they line up behind their, hopefully I'm not getting laggy again, behind their leader, whoever it's meant to be. They have shown such obsequience, is that the word I'm looking for, to Trump. It's not just that that the Republicans to this point have followed Trump and his policies. It's that they've actively worked to undermine our constitutional setup in order to help Trump. Nunes has, manipulated and abused the investigation, the investigatory oversight powers of Congress. Paul Ryan failed entirely to protect the powers of the House and Senate as co-equal branches from his side. Mitch McConnell, too, has been a complete collaborator with Trump and covering for Trump, and sort of like he'll just put his fingers in his ears when Trump is being ridiculous and point to Chuck Schumer and go, "He's your problem. You deal with him." I hate Mitch McConnell so much. He's so useless and smarmy and just craven and pointless and he's going to go down, I'm sure, in history as one of the worst majority leaders ever, because he has been. But we're finally starting to see some political realities that are, well, here's what it really boils down to. Republicans are to the point where they're less scared by Trump supporters cowing them into being a lickspittle, a bootlicker of the president, than they are in their own political survival. An interesting number that came up in this, I read this article last night, and I'm pretty sure that this is the one that has it. Kevin and I talked about in our show. By the way, three corrections before I get to this one. This note one is I said in the happy hour on Friday that it was Michael Cohen's father. It's actually his father-in-law that Trump was threatening. Last week I think I said Malcolm Vance, and it's actually Malcolm Nance, who's the really spicy and opinionated former CIA guy who appears on MSNBC. And there was one person whose name I couldn't remember also last week, and it was Jim Fagluzzi, I think is how you pronounce it. He's also from the FBI, former FBI like intelligence dude, and they give their perspective. So all those corrections I wanted to make. But one of the things Kevin and I talked about were some poll numbers that showed that 53% of people blamed Republicans and the president for the shutdown. When you look into the numbers, maybe it's not this article. I thought it was though. When you look into the numbers more carefully, and they asked a different question: do you blame Trump? Do you blame the GOP? Or do you blame Democrats? That only like 50% blamed Trump, and only 3% voted who said blamed the Republicans in Congress. So as the senators and the GOP House members feel their numbers split from evaluation of the president a little bit, there's some room there. If Trump, and he's incompetent, he's an idiot, he's a fool, and the longer he's in office, the more of that will be exposed. As the president's numbers start to sink, they will want to hold their asses harmless, cover their butts. And this is why we saw cracks. We saw that Mitch McConnell could not keep his caucus together. Were there 6 Republican senators who swapped over? The Democratic bill to reopen the government in the Senate received more votes than the Republican bill did. I think the Republican bill got 50, the Democratic one got 52. And after that vote, apparently, Mitch McConnell called in to the Trump White House and said, "Look, I can't keep these guys together. We're cracking." And as the pressure would get up, dial up, the longer the shutdown went on, it was only going to get worse. I really hope now that we're going to see that Republicans starting to break from the president increasingly, because it will help weaken Trump in the lead up to his re-election. It will increase the likelihood that if there is an impeachment voted on in the House, that you might get a proper conviction in the Senate, as Republicans from more purple states who are up, and there are more Republicans who are up and defending their seats in 2020 than Democrats. It was the opposite situation in 2018. So in terms of being on the back foot, the GOP has already more places to defend. They've got a president who's never hit 50% in their approval ratings, and they're now being tied to his shutdown. So we might see a second blue wave coming up here. I mean, who knows what's going to happen because the election is still a very long way out. But even the worst, I think even the worst Democratic candidate that is currently thinking about running for president, you know, the weakest, you'd say, from the smallest state or the shortest time in office or experience, would still be more competent than the idiot that occupies the White House right now, who won't even read his own briefing documents, who spends more time watching Fox News than understanding what's going on in the world, who's more interested in his State of the Union address than in assuring federal workers that they will get paid for the work that they do. Oh, and then, of course, sorry, there was the whole story that Donald Trump, yeah, it's over here in the corner. Oh, he's such a piece of shit. Such a piece of shit. He's got employees that have worked sometimes for 15 years or, you know, years and years, decades. They were given awards for being employees of the month. If you scroll down in here, there's actually pictures here. Employee of the month, been there for years, also undocumented workers. After there was an expose of undocumented workers working for Trump on one of his businesses, all of his businesses now, apparently, they're doing background checks on all the employees and hauling in any undocumented worker and firing them to cover the president's ass. What a piece of shit. Again, Trump throws people overboard all the time. He's like sociopathic in his lack of empathy for human suffering, for anyone suffering but his own and maybe his own families. But I think the suffering experienced by his own family is really his discomfort at being embarrassed. I don't even think he has true empathy or compassion for his own children. I don't think he's biologically capable. I don't think his brain works that way. And this is basically how he acts. He figures out what's best for him, regardless of the pain and suffering it's going to cause anyone else, and he does it to cover his butt. Ugh, this guy is so disgusting. And I would hope that this coverage of the workers who are being fired like this, I would hope that it would inspire people to reach out to them and give them jobs somewhere else. Because if you're getting, you're working there day in, day out, you're doing your job, their healthcare, whatever else is tied to there, and suddenly because your boss made a mistake and now you're going to pay for it. That's how Trump works. And can I also just say that on this issue, Ann Coulter, I watched little bits of her appearance on the Bill Maher. I've really tuned out of Bill Maher because he's just angry old white dude, and I'm so over that. I know what angry old white dudes are saying because I've been listening to them for 40 years. So I don't need to hear Bill Maher complain about the same thing he's been complaining about forever. But on that show, she was saying, Ann Coulter was complaining about how undocumented workers drive down wages, and therefore, unions should also really be anti-immigrant because it's driving down their wages. And she made some sort of joke about, like the kinds of people, she's got Latin American people doing her lawn or her pool work. And I was thinking, Ann, what you're basically saying is you'd prefer to hire white people to do those jobs, but they're still shitty jobs. And that's not what she's not getting, is that when undocumented workers come to the United States and do those, they're tracked often into housekeeping and these sorts of very manual labor jobs by employers who don't want to pay them money. Yes, agreed. But they would want to pay white people and Americans, or like not just white people, but they would want to pay Americans that little money too, if they could get away with it. And this idea that somehow, vast quantities of American workers are being displaced because of undocumented work ignores the reality that Americans don't want to pick fruit, get up before dawn and drive to a farm field, and then do physical labor for 10 hours or 11 hours a day for a very low wage, and then, drive home and try to live like that every day. And the problem isn't undocumented workers. The problem is the system. The problem is the way that things are set up, and that we need to I think, take companies like Walmart, anything that's got massive profits, and not only create a living wage for all their workers, which would save money on public benefits. If people were getting paid a decent wage to live, they wouldn't need food stamps or Medicaid. So why would a job not provide you? If your job is forcing you to be dependent on the government, that's not a job worth adding to the economy, in my opinion, especially when you have massively profitable companies engaging in that. So I think, in terms of like redistributing capital that's developed in a country, guaranteeing those kinds of corporate jobs where they do have minimum wage, where people could be put onto social public support, all of those should be, like a living wage. And we should also tax those corporations to give offsets to small businesses to pay their employees the same wage. So I think corporations should definitely be doing more, and there should be way more redistribution of the profits. Oh, I'm too big for this. I need to move my thing over a little bit. I'm ending up in the wrong side of the channel. All right, so I've been nattering on now for quite a long time. Let me just move that. There, that's a little bit better, isn't it? Less likely to. I get a little bit laggy, I see, when I do that, but I'm a little bit less likely to cut my own head off while I'm talking. I will check the chat one more time, you guys, and then after that, we'll wrap it up. So now we're about 20 minutes away from really ending. Let me change to the screen that has that one, if I can get my mouse to work. Otherwise, I'll have to do it by hand. Oh my goodness gracious, how awful. I think, oh, that's it. The problem was I lost my my mouse. Still not really good at that whole, whatchamacallit, split screen option. Where did I put that one? Maybe I was just actually put it on my channel. I was just live on my channel, so let me go back. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, this will be your last shot to ask them, and then we'll wrap it up. I need to do my family calls on a Sunday and enjoy the rest of the day before I have to go back to work on Monday. Pop out chat, and I can minimize this. And Coulter Grr, hell yeah. Oh, actually, I think I found it. I found the right one. It's just over here. Yay! Yes, I'll put it in the corner because the background is so pretty. You guys really should see it if you want to. Okay. Going back up. It's not the same money though. Oh, we already talked about tobacco corporations. Simone just tagged me in for no particular reason. Thank you. Not even Carl Benjamin would make that argument. I don't know what I was talking about at the time. The idea to get a sex change to be able to do something with it. Yeah. The whole the TERF argument that people shouldn't be able to change their own sexual assignment on their legal documents is the worst sort of slippery slope crap arguments that I've heard in a long time. It reminds me a lot of the kind of homophobic remarks. I think there was a whole thing about, gay people in bathrooms or gay people in changing rooms or whatever else too when that first started, and it's sad. It feels like, oh God, not this shit again. Even if you think centrist Dems are more electable, I think you shouldn't back them because then they won't back the policies needed to save the world. Well, then you'll have Republican rule. You'll have a bunch of lefties who are really self-righteous and pure, and in the meantime, you'll have a bunch of centrist Republicans and right-wing Republicans who are making policy. I mean, if you have a PR system, more power to you. Vote for the party you want and go for coalition. But when it's first past the post, you're looking at making compromises in the kind of candidates you back to get elected or getting policies that destroy people's lives. So I'd rather make a sacrifice and work within the Democratic power system. I mean, Democratic as in the Democratic Party power system, and have those debates within our party than try to convince Republicans to practice basic humanity. Mommy, no, it's barely 2 o'clock. I've been going for 2 hours, though. So, I get, yeah, if I do that. Sorry, I've got 2 different windows up, and I look like I was cutting my own head off in the other one. Yeah, the point, so the world will end either way. That's actually kind of where I am. I mean, I don't have, for all Carl's attempts to distract with a stupid off-point thing that made no sense, asking me questions when he was on the show with Kevin and myself. I don't have kids, and so when I go, buy Good Cruel World, I don't freaking care. I have family members that I care about, but I don't have that investment of a child in terms of like taking care of the next generation. And I think we're fucked. Sorry. I think in another 150 years, this is going to be a terrible place to live. And I do what I can insofar as I don't have a car, because I can actually live in a place where I don't need a car. But I know in areas of rural Wisconsin, you can't exist without a car and the expense that comes with it and everything else. So anyway, I think as a species, we have so much potential, but we also give in to our worst impulses so often. More like 20 years, possibly. 20 years, the world could be a complete shithole. I mean, I often think of the fact that I have, our family has land in Wisconsin where we can grow root vegetables and have well water. So at least we will, and I'll have to get books on canning. So when the electricity goes out and everything, I'll get books on like how to grow a garden, how to can food, and go back to nature, because that might be the direction we're going. If the world will end anyway, why not do your best? Well, I do try to do my best in terms of my environmental footprint. In terms of, I only fly when I have to. I do prefer rail, and I don't have a car. But, and I recycle. I'm in a country that does a really good job with recycling. And I saw that Germany, I don't know if you guys saw this headline, but Germany is going to try to phase out all coal, or the use of coal, by 2030 something or other. I mean, it's probably going to be too late by then, but so I'm living in a place that's actually making an effort to not kill us all. Sir Toby, but what if the lefty candidate is more electable in a general election by virtue of appealing to more independents and non-party affiliated voters? I think if you mean by lefty, you mean socialist. I think you underestimate the residue of Red Scare in most of rural America. I think, it's fine for people on the coast to talk about democratic socialism and everything else. And I think there are places like Madison where you just have you have a part of the population, like in terms of let's take Dane County in Madison and whatever else makes up, I think it's the 2nd congressional district. You've got, as a percentage, a high degree of people. There are parts of the city of Madison where college degree completion rates are in the 60-70% range. All right, and so the kinds of policies that you can explain to people who have that level of college education and the cognitive training, this is it. They've had an advantage in life in that they have cognitive training to process information in a way that like a policymaker would understand. And you get other districts where you have maybe 15-20% college education, and they're conservative, Christian ways and everything else. So if, you want to say by lefty, we want to do a Bernie Sanders type socialist revolution, it's just not going to fly with people who have a lot of property, in the form of like farmers and pay a lot of tax and the idea of redistribution. It's also really weird because farmers get so much government benefit. But if you want to talk about, as a candidate, going after the big banks and going after the financial institutions, that's great for college-educated, middle-class white voters. I'm going to be honest. The Bernie Sanders message last time was kill the banks, provide free college, and healthcare for all. And that's perfect for a suburb of Madison that's 75% white. But, like dealing with Wall Street is a pretty, middle-class concern. Worrying about college education costs assume that you have public schools that are good enough to actually get your kids into college. And I think that the biggest problem I see with Bernie Sanders as an independent and people who follow him is they want to make class the primary identity on which we all unite. And when you make workers and working and the economy the central part of your identity, you exclude children, you exclude people who are unemployed, you exclude retirees, and you exclude, women who choose not to work outside the house. And so you end up having a very male worker, white, middle class focus that you want to impute on people who are living in different parts of the country, who don't have that experience, who might be out of employment, and selling that to them. You think that it's going to be easy, but if it was as easy as you would think, we would have more socialists elected. All right, so I'm going to... Bernie Sanders is kind of a social democrat, I guess. I guess it's probably the party he'd end up in Europe. Probably, I guess. But even that kind of I think he wants to do a lot more like nationalization. So, wouldn't the same argument apply to candidates who aren't white? It's not just that he's... So, it's about where you focus your identity. And I don't think that Sanders or some of his supporters realize how much they're reflecting a white male identity when they talk about class politics. Y'all thinking about, oh, everyone should appeal, it should appeal to women because of this, and it should appeal to people of color because of that. But you're not actually listening to us when we tell you why Bernie Sanders doesn't excite us. Or when we tell you, look, when you make economic class the focus, it's just like what the Marxist feminists were criticizing Marxists for back when Marxism was first being, promoted or developed as a theory, which is Marxists would tell women, look, when the revolution comes, we won't have any more sexism. So what y'all women need to do is shut your mouth about your sexism problems and focus on overturning capitalism, because when we have the utopia, all those problems will be taken care of. I still hear that from Bernie Sanders. That's my problem. I don't hear him actually understanding. It's like when he had the problem with his the sexual harassment in his own campaign. He's like, well, I was a bit busy running around the country, so I couldn't really deal with this minor problem of women on my own staff who are volunteering for me feeling uncomfortable by the men on my staff volunteering for me. No, that is a problem. And I don't see him recognizing that. And I also don't why does Bernie Sanders keep missing votes on Russia? Why is it when there are Russian sanction votes going on, that man is not to be found? This is also a question I have about Bernie Sanders. So anyway, class politics. Yeah, you have a lot. Okay, class politics built the biggest coalition in America in terms of formal labor movements. Yes, but in terms of that's not just because you have a labor union. That doesn't mean you're the biggest coalition. Feminists in the who are working for suffrage formed a massive coalition, but they didn't do it through unions. So you don't see that. This is my problem with class-based politics. It overrides every other intersection of, it can override every other intersection of oppression to this extent that well, yeah, you might experience racism, you might experience sexism, but the real problem, I say as a white guy, is class discrimination. It's like, okay, that's fine if that's your experience, but don't tell me what my important experiences should be. Don't tell me that class should override the other forms of oppression. You need to stop, listen. Why, when women of color are complaining about Sanders supporters, listen. Don't tell them that they're wrong and why they shouldn't hold those views. Listen to them. All right. Yeah, in terms of Sanders, I frame it in terms of Sanders because that's the Bernie bro experience I have. So maybe we're also talking past each other. Anyway, this was a fun conversation. Me and Toby are going back and forth in the chat, and y'all are along for the ride. So I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, I am checking my audio too, and I'm still trying to make sure I don't clip. All right, it must be 2 o'clock now. And I do have to get going because other people want me to call them on a weekend. I have to go call my family. Oh my gosh, top of the hour. When I tell you guys I have a good internal clock, I'm not even playing. I really do. It's like, it seems to be the top of the hour. What time is it? Top of the hour. And I probably said about 20 minutes ago that we'd be leaving, right? So at least in that, I'm being consistent. This is really a fun show, you guys. I'm getting better at the Sunday show. I'm trying to improve my radio professionalism voice by reducing my verbal pauses, and also with my mic work. You guys inspire me in that, and I get better every time for you. So thank you for being my inspiration. I should say that. You guys thank me for showing up and giving the content. I would not be doing it if you weren't here to listen and interact and spar with me, which I appreciate. I don't mind. I would rather, I have an easier time sparring with, debating with people on the left, anarchists, people who are, because I would still rather have a discussion with you about why I'm not quite as left as you than to try to, you know, deal with Sargon, because he just lies. So y'all I know are honest. You're just coming from like a different place from me, and I still love you. I still, you know, I still respect you guys, and I want to advance a progressive lefty agenda, even if you think I'm not as progressive as I should be in your opinion. But everybody, of course, has their own take. So, I mean, unity on the left. I would still support a more progressive candidate than a less progressive one, always. So until next Sunday, please, if you want to come back on the channel, I'll be doing Hangout with my patrons tonight at 7 o'clock, which is in about 5 hours from now. I also am going to do probably another happy hour with Kevin, but not till the later part of this week. He's got a lot of shows on. He's got to let them eat cake, and he's just done another interview last night. You saw on his channel he did a happy hour, so it'll probably be a little ways down the road before Kevin and I get together again. And just so you know, I am getting caught up on the podcast versions of the happy hour. I've been so busy at work, as you guys know, because I complained about it repeatedly over the month of December and January. But I did go back. I downloaded the audio for the last 5 episodes of the happy hour. I've set them on our Podbean account to be released once per day for the next 5 days, and probably by the time we get to the happy hour that Kevin and I just did, it will be time for another happy hour. So you can go over there. I want to thank also the people in the chat, Kay and John, who threw some money at me. I do really appreciate it, because I'm paying $15 a month out of my own pocket for the podcasts. So you guys have now thank both HK, was it, and John for basically their financial support, because their stuff is going to host your podcasting material. So until the happy hour later in the week, until the Patreon show later on today, until you hear my voice in a podcast, I've been Kristi. You guys in the chat have been absolutely awesome. I love you too, Sir Toby. Like I said, I don't get as mad. I get frustrated with people on the left, but I don't hate them so much. And we'll talk to you guys later. Have a great Sunday until we see each other next Sunday. And if you have other ideas or suggestions for the show, like last bit. Like, you know, I'm doing the little bit of social science every time. I could in theory do a little reaction video if we wanted to sit together and mock some dumb shitlord. We can do that too. It'll be some kind of mix of politics. So this show, I'm happy for it to evolve as we go on, and then I'm going to stop now, see what happens next time as the show evolves. But if you do have ideas or comments, leave them in underneath the description box of the video below. So until next time, guys, we'll see ya. Bye-bye. Stop streaming!